Chris DeLeon here of GamKeto, and what I'm going to talk about today is a concept from fiction that marketing companies often use to lie to you and get your money. That concept is one that is labeled by TV tropes as possession implies mastery. Possession implies mastery. And what that's all about is the kind of thing where in video games, as a matter of convenience to simplify the story and speed things along, theoretical physicist Gordon Freeman picks up a machine gun and suddenly can operate that weapon as skillfully as anybody, as though gun ranges weren't a thing precisely because operating a firearm is actually impressively difficult to do well, right? Or in a TV show, maybe during a fight, a character picks up a sword and suddenly can sword fight like a pirate. I used to fence. I can assure you it takes a surprising amount of relatively lame and unexciting and drills to be able to half competently handle a sword in your hand, right? Or in the case of comics and comic book films, there's often a mutant or some other creature or superhero or villain who can steal the power of other mutants, superheroes, villains, etc. And as soon as they have that power, can use it just as well. So let's say one character can fly, they steal the ability to fly, now they can fly just as skillfully, as though flying didn't involve some impressive amount of practice and coordination to gain mastery of that feat. It's actually part of what I love about Spider-Man, that they'll often show Peter Parker struggling, smashing into walls, falling from trees, to get a handle on this ability. That's a complicated thing to use well. But where this comes up outside of there is that we know better, that we know that real life involves practice and things, right? But the montages in films, even when we see people train, it's very quick. You know, Rocky, whether even Peter Parker's cases, they'll cut together a few kind of impressive looking, eccentric, cool looking stuff. They don't show us a lot of the really, really lame practice because we don't want to see it because it's not entertaining. That's entertainment, right? Where this comes back to hurt us is when someone tries to sell us something under the impression that's going to be the same as us being able to do it, right? I mean, it's the same confusion someone might have of like, I own Photoshop, therefore I'm an artist. I own Maya, so I can do 3D models. I have Unreal on my computer. I'm ready to program games. Not quite, right? Those are the tools. Those are the sword, the firearm, whatever from our examples of having it is not the same as being able to put it to good use, right? Or especially where the marketing people come to take advantage of this is they might try to sell you something under the impression that basically it's this magic thing. It's going to solve your problem. You know, you're going to get the skill when you pay for this thing. And that's not how it works. There's this great quote from Jim Rohn. So right now I'm working on vetting applicants for my one-on-one worldwide training through GamKeto.com. And part of what I look for, I always keep in mind this quote from Jim Rohn that says, you can't hire someone else to do your push-ups for you, right? You can't hire someone else to do your push-ups for you. You can hire someone to hold you accountable, right? You can hold someone to make sure you're doing them properly to get good benefit out of it. That's all stuff I do as a trainer. But you can't hire someone to do it for you. And part of what I do is I weed out applicants, people who think that all they have to do is pay me and then it's going to be easy. It's not. It's a long path of making mistakes and learning from practice and doing all kinds of other simpler things that are less impressive, less glamorous as they go. But it's the real path to get to where you want to go. Because the path between you and the skills you want to have that you don't yet have isn't paved with products. It's paved with experiences. It's paved with stuff you have to do. You have to go through. Does that make sense? I mean, so to go back to this marketing thing, there's some pretty extreme examples where, like say in the sports world, they'll try to position it as though if you just buy this sneaker, or you just buy this duffel bag, or you just drink this sports drink, you're somehow going to perform better at basketball, or soccer, or wrestling, or whatever your sport of choice might be. And likewise, in the video game realm, obviously there's all kinds of marketing companies that sell really flashy rainbow light, mice and other attachments and keyboards and peripherals and things as though that's going to have any impact on their skill playing a game, which we know is kind of silly. But even smart people, I think, sometimes can get duped into the attractiveness of the idea of all they have to do is spend a little bit of money and it's going to do the work for them, as opposed to realizing that really it's the experience that's going to help them gain those skills. All right? We see the same thing oftentimes that happens from, I feel bad saying this, but it's true, school degrees related to game development, where someone will think that all they have to do is if they can just pay for this degree, then they're going to get it and then they get a job. Now, the reality is oftentimes those programs are not, especially in my exposure to them, not rigorous enough to guarantee that the people who leave with those degrees really have the skills that they're meant to denote. I know when I taught in university, part of what steered me away from sticking around teaching that kind of setting, I was taught by people who were preparing me to be a grader in that school that anyone who shows up in class and does the things that are assigned, they're probably B-level work. Which is to say that they could be misunderstanding 20% of what they were tasked with learning to understand and then move forward. Now, this is actually precisely why a lot of people who struggle in math, it's because they don't have a solid foundation to build upon because they were allowed to keep slipping by, misunderstanding sizable chunks of what they're supposed to know. It's why in my one-on-one training or my game development club, Gamketo Club, in either one of those kind of cases now, if someone misunderstands something, we take the time to figure out what did you misunderstand. Let's make sure you do understand it, so in the future that's a skill you can build upon. The reason why so many of these programs can get away with that is because they're not actually building any higher than introductory level. They sort of have a smorgasbord or a sampler platter of different things you could do without really going that deep into any of them, which is possible when they aren't held accountable to making sure you can actually do things before you leave, right? And so someone leaves there with a degree that they've bought and they think, aha, I can get a job with this. But companies are a little more savvy than that. Fortunately, they have to watch after the bottom lines. So they say, okay, well, you have this piece of paper that says you sat in classes, and then they let you out of there because you paid them enough, because that's how universities now work in the school system. Can you actually do anything? Have you made some projects? Have you put your ideas into action? Have you applied? Have you stretched? Have you made your own mistakes to learn from? Right? And I think this is huge, right? This is a massive thing of have you made mistakes to learn from? Because part of what also makes the traditional educational route so hard for game development is that it's one of these skills where you learn from it by making mistakes. By making the right mistakes at the right time in your learning. For some people it happens randomly. In my training, part of what I do is I steer people at the right times in their learning progression to make the right kind of mistakes to learn from, to better appreciate and internalize and understand why and how they do things differently as they move forward. Sometimes they'll try to skip that stuff, to fit stuff into a curriculum, into a sequence, into a timeline, where instead they'll teach you the dogmatic impression of how to simulate or parrot the impression that you know how and why you should do one kind of programming instead of another way of doing it, or just gain a distaste for sloppy, hacky code or whatever. I teach, first we do that until it doesn't work anymore, then we have a better internalized sense for why and how that is sort of a way for small programs to be built, it's a way to rapid prototype, and it's not why we build larger and larger things. Now, speaking of larger and larger things, another way I look out for when I'm screening applicants, and this goes back to this idea of possession does not imply mastery, just hiring me as a trainer doesn't give someone skills. Part of what I'm looking for is this understanding that if you want to go from you've never built a reasonable size, reasonably complex game before, and you want to go to building a very complex, very big game, then there is nothing you can buy that's going to actually get you from here to that level of skill necessary. What you need along the way are experiences. And in particular, if we think about any given piece of this bigger game, should not be your first time doing that piece if that game matters to you. If you want to release it, if you want to put it out there in a way that matters, if you want to document it, if you want to have a dev blog, give it its own Twitter handle, try to put a price point on it, Kickstarter, anything else that matters to you, even just identify with it as your own expression, then anything in there should be at least second draft, ideally third, fourth. What I mean is, let's say there's procedural level generation in it, or tile-based world collision, or inverse kinematics physics, or A-star pathfinding, or whatever other aspects might be involved, a dialogue system, remappable controls, networked multiplayer. Any piece that's an ingredient in a game you care to do well should not be your first time doing it, because by having experience first doing it in a stepping stone project which you may not release, you may not dev blog about, you may not do too much publicity around, it's part of why I don't further publicize the projects people have built in the Gamketo training with me. What that's doing is it's getting you comfort in those skills, so by the time you do it in the project where you're really aiming for, you can better estimate how long it's going to take you. You've already got some beginner errors out of your system. Your own specific errors have been surfaced as which are misunderstandings, so we can fill them in. So by the time you go about it in a way that matters, it's much tighter, right? And moreover, it's usually, you could even borrow code from your past self. More often than not, people don't even do that, because when they have that richer understanding of having done it before, they go into it with a cleaner understanding of how to do it even better the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time. And when you put things out there in a market space where you really care about the outcome and you're trying to do something with it and get it somewhere, then that's who you're competing against. People who it's not their first time doing any of the things in their bigger games. Does that make sense? So this is the kind of thing where, once again, it's those experiences that pave that path. And just like with learning to be a boxer, learning to play a sport, learning to handle a sword, whatever it might be, there's a lot of training along the way that itself isn't that glamorous, right? I mean, they could try to squeeze a montage out of it, but really, in our case, it's probably building some less impressive games as stepping stones towards the kinds of projects that you want to be able to do. And I say this not to discourage anybody. I say this because if somebody says that they can get you from you never made anything to building that giant thing all on your own with total understanding how it works, it's just not going to work. You're going to keep spending money buying products, buying video courses you're not going to be able to grok, buying ebooks or whatever you're not going to really be reading before you're not going to get there. What you need is a path of experience where if you have something, you're being held accountable to use it, or at least you are getting something you know works. That's not just being sold to people who get the impression that owning this is the same as having the skill, right? There is a way, there is a path between you and where you want to get, between you and the skills you want to have. And I think that's encouraging, right? The path is not as glamorous as it might look from the outside, but there is a path, which ultimately in the long run is a whole lot better off for you to understand and see and be realistic about and learn to work your way through than to just sit back and just keep throwing money between you and that project that isn't realistically something you're going to be able to tackle yet. Does that make sense? So anyway, it's Chris Deleon here for Gamketo. I don't want to keep you all in longer, and I got other work to be doing today anywho. But thanks for tuning in. I look forward to playing your games in the future.